mute their microphone. A reminder as well, to insert a document into the record, please have staff email it to documentstni@mail.house.gov. So good afternoon and welcome to today's, I want to welcome today's witnesses joining the Aviation Subcommittee's hearing titled Starships and Stripes Forever, an examination of the FAA's role in the future of space flight. Earlier this year, NASA celebrated 60 years since astronaut Alan Shepard made the first U.S. piloted spaceflight in the Mercury Freedom 7 spacecraft. And since then, space launches in the National Aerospace System, or NAS, have increased. Rigorous subcommittee oversight work helps guarantee U.S. aviation and aerospace remains the global gold standard in safety by identifying current and anticipated concerns and identifying how Congress, the FAA, and industry and labor stakeholders can work together to address these issues. The first panel today are representatives from the FAA and the Government Accountability Office. They will discuss the status of federal regulation and the oversight of the commercial space industry, necessary improvements, and the hurdles the FAA faces in carrying out its mission to provide the safest and most efficient aviation system in the world. The second panel will help the subcommittee better understand how the industry navigates the current regulatory landscape for commercial space flight and what is needed in the future. As chair and as a member of Congress, I have also made improving diversity in the U.S. aerospace industry a priority. It's important that subcommittee hearings have diverse backgrounds, views, and perspectives at the table. However, in many cases, the U.S. transportation workforce lacks the diversity that reflects the true diversity of this country, a problem that extends to commercial space. So unfortunately, it is not any different in the commercial space sector. A recent survey of the aerospace and defense industry found that the number of women in the industry is around 24%, while only 6% of respondents identified as a person of color, and just less than 8% identified as Hispanic or Latino. As the industry works to increase the diversity of its workforce, I also expect to hear from the second panel today how they plan to address this. Until then, we'll continue to work with stakeholders to find new ways for underrepresented groups to participate in the discussion and this industry. The first panel today is the FAA and GAO. Once the exclusive purview of the federal government, space launches in the U.S. are now a growing commercial industry. With this evolving dynamic has come an accompanying change in the role of the federal government. The FAA is now tasked with overseeing not only the NAS and launches that may impact the NAS, but also regulations related to launch and spaceport licensing and safety regulations. Mr. Wayne Monteith, the FAA's Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation, is here today to discuss these issues, as well as FAA's vision for this industry. Ms. Heather Krause, the Director of Physical Infrastructure at the GAO, is also here today, and Ms. Krause will provide GAO's research that has been done on this topic, as well as recommendations for both the FAA and the industry. In the interest of time, because we have votes, I'll wait on the discussing the second panel until we get to the second panel. And with that, I will now call on Ranking Member of the Subcommittee, Mr. Garrett Graves, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chair Larson and Ranking Member Graves, and I also want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Chairman, for many years, the commercial space transportation industry more than earned the moniker nascent. In fact, in 2011, the FAA licensed only one single commercial space launch, but in the past few years, it has been transformative. Nearly half of the more than 400 space launches licensed by the FAA have occurred since 2011. The FAA now routinely licenses a launch a week or more. 3 American companies will be taking passengers into space just this year, with a 4th set to join next year. In 2011, there were just over 1,000 active satellites in orbit. Now there are more than 3,300. What used to be a science project is now a thriving transportation industry that transports passengers and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of cargo to and from space. As this industry continues to advance, it's important that we explore steps we should take to lay the foundation for the next decade of growth. The committee's #1 priority is safety. While spaceflight is an inherently risky endeavor, we all know that there's no future for commercial space transportation unless launch vehicles are safe. Although the FAA has a perfect public safety record for commercial space launches, a statutory learning period has restricted the issuance of launch vehicle crew and passenger safety regulations. This period of time, much like the early barnstorming days of aviation, has allowed time to work through the complexities of commercial space transportation and develop consensus standards. After a slow start, the consensus standard work is gathering momentum. This policy has been very successful in promoting both growth and safety. The learning period expires in September of 2023, and Congress will need to decide whether to extend the learning period, let it lapse, or find an alternative policy solution. It's an important question, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on this issue. Adequate resources for the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, AST, and leveraging the expertise of the private sector are also important issues. While launch cadences have increased by more than 400% over the last 5 years, AST's staffing has increased by only 15%. General Monteith recently led AST through a reorganization and completed a revamp of the FAA's launch and reentry regulations. We should take a hard look at ensuring AST is efficient as possible, that it has access to industry expertise, and the FAA resources don't hold the commercial space transportation industry back. The increased launch cadences are also challenging our limited airspace resources. We must ensure the FAA develops the tools and equipment necessary to safely integrate commercial space transportation launches into our national airspace system. But we cannot focus solely on the safety of our airspace at launch. We must also consider its safety when the objects return from space. That's why Chair Larson and I recently introduced the Aerospace Debris Safety Act, which directs the FAA to establish a system to track re-entering space debris, block affected airspace, and warn aircraft when such debris may pose a hazard. Even small satellites re-entering the atmosphere can create debris clouds through which aircraft may fly. The bill also directs the DOT to provide space situational awareness data and services to ensure commercial space transportation safety on orbit and to prevent the potential catastrophic collisions of satellites and debris. Just this weekend, the G7 recognized the need for the growing issue of space debris and the need for a collaborative approach for space traffic management. Although some have proposed to place these authorities in a different agency, I believe that the FAA is the right agency for the job. Finally, I'm excited to announce that I've reintroduced the 21st Century Aerospace Infrastructure Act, which provides infrastructure improvement grants for commercial spaceports. These grants will represent an important federal contribution to the capital needs of our national spaceport system and leverage state, local, and private investment in these assets. Addressing these issues and others is critical to ensuring that we maintain our leadership in aerospace. I look forward to continuing to work on bipartisan solutions to these questions. Thank you again to Chairman Larson, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Graves. Before I turn to the chair of the full committee, I'd ask unanimous consent that written statements prepared by the Commercial Spaceflight Federation be entered into the hearing record. Without objection, so ordered. With that, I'll recognize Chair of the full committee, Representative DeFazio of Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the ranking member for calling today's hearing to hear from the FAA and stakeholders on the government's regulation of industry and the future of commercial space. This is an important and growing sector, but there are three main points that I hope we can move through and hear meaningful conversation about during today's hearing. I want to hear from each witness their view on these three things: the imperative for better integration of launches and reentries into the air traffic system, the significant need for thoughtful regulation of this blooming, largely unregulated industry, and a commitment to reducing the environmental damage associated with rocket launches. We don't have any real recent statistics, but in December of 18, 1,400 commercial flights containing, many thousands of Americans were detoured 70,000 miles because of a launch. In the future, with more and more launches, I would expect that we're going to see more and more delays. And I am not in favor of telling people in America who are traveling for pleasure or for work or family emergency, whatever reason they're on a commercial airplane, oh, sorry, your flight's going to be delayed, or you're going to be an hour and a half late and miss your connection because some millionaire or billionaire is going to experience 15 minutes of weightlessness. That's not right. And I want to see that that does not happen. I'll give the FAA credit for being conservative in determining how much airspace to block off and how long. I mean, safety is never subject to negotiation or compromise, and the FAA has rightly given these initial commercial space operations a wide berth to protect the safety of aircraft in flight. However, I understand that in May 2020, the FAA finally published a long overdue concept of operations that details the vision to better integrate launch and reentry vehicles as they transition through the air traffic control system. I further understand the FAA is working on a system called the Space Data Integrator that will allow for more narrowly tailored airspace closures and designations, essentially real time, minimizing disruptions caused by commercial space activity. I'm going to expect an update on that today, and I hope that the timeline is very short. Second, it's time to end the FAA's dual mandate. I dealt with this when I was a member of this committee. I sat in hearing after hearing and raised concerns about the idea that the FAA was the regulator, but also the promoter of commercial aviation, something left over from the Civil Aeronautics Board, left over from the dawn of the aviation era in the United States. I said, well, it's a mature industry, and I think it's a problem that you're regulating and promoting. And witness after witness from the FAA said, no problem, no problem. And then when we're the year of value jet, I tried again to strip out the promotion authority. My amendment was not approved. Then we were in conference, ValueJet went down, and I wasn't on the conference because I was pre-junior, but I got a call saying, hey, that amendment you had, that thing, where did we put it in the bill? And this was the old days, if it wasn't in our bill and it wasn't in the Senate bill, you put it in the bill. I said, well, it's not conferenceable, it wasn't in either bill. And they're like, oh, don't worry about that. And they stuck it in the bill. And we stripped away their promotional authority. So, I think, and I intend to soon introduce a legislation to do that. NASA can promote commercial space, Commerce Department can, promote it, whomever. The private sector can promote it themselves. It is not up to the FAA to promote commercial space and regulate at the same time in the interests of public health and safety. So that, and I'm also have a concern that Congress, with the agreement of successive administrations, the industry has prohibited the FAA from regulating the design, operation of launch vehicles to protect the health, safety of passengers. We had a learning period which was extended to 2023, and that means, despite commercial human spaceflight and space tourism soon expected to become emerging markets, the FAA's hands will be tied. They won't be able to regulate for the safety of the flying public. I have serious concerns that some parts of the industry are talking about yet another extension of the moratorium. And then finally, the issue of the environment. I want to talk about black carbon, other environmental effects of rocket launches. Black carbon is soot, primarily emitted from kerosene-fueled rocket engines like SpaceX Falcon 9 or United Launch Alliance's Atlas V, and can have a particularly detrimental effect on the Earth's upper ozone layer. These emissions remain in the stratosphere for 3 to 5 years, so the destructive effects aren't short-term. I mean, at the moment, they're only 1% of the depletion of the ozone. But, the industry is growing, and it's estimated to grow tenfold in the coming years. So does that mean it'll deplete, 10 times as much of the ozone layer? And then also, commercial space launch vehicles emit a stunning amount of carbon dioxide. A SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket burns 400 metric tons of kerosene and emits more carbon dioxide in a few minutes than an average car would in 2 centuries of driving. Now, other vehicles are less intrusive in the environment because they don't require rockets to leave the atmosphere. one flight of a Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 launch, a vehicle designed to launch customers to a low stratum of space, is only expected to produce about the same amount of carbon dioxide as for business seat returning from London. And Virgin Galactic's President of Space Missions and Safety, Mr. Mike Moses, here today, so perhaps he can speak a little more about the environmental advantages of this type of launch vehicle. But more broadly, I want to hear from our industry stakeholders on what their companies are doing to address the environmental effects of space operations, because they have to be addressed and anticipated in the future. These are my chief concerns about the trajectory of this growing industry, and I'm really looking forward to this hearing to enlighten us on a path forward on some of these issues. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to balance my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to welcome the witnesses to the first panel. Again, Mr. Wayne Monteith, Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation at the FAA, and Ms. Heather Krause, Director of Physical Infrastructure Government Accountability Office. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since that is the case, the subcommittee requests you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. I'll first recognize Mr. Monteith for 5 minutes. Mr. Monteith.
Thank you, sir. Chair Larson, Chair DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and Ranking Member Graves. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss commercial space regulation. What was once called the final frontier is now well within our reach. We thank the committee for its willingness to usher in this exciting sector of transportation that, quite frankly, was almost unimaginable. The future is here, and with our focus on safety and technology, we are indeed turning science fiction into real science, albeit rocket science. The commercial space transportation industry in the United States is thriving at an unprecedented rate. The numbers are clear and unambiguous. This year, we'll see an increase in licensed launches of over 400% in just the last 5 years. What that really means is we've gone from averaging one FAA license launch about every 5 weeks to currently one launch about every 5 days. As regulators, our focus is on all aspects of this burgeoning industry, but especially on safety. We view ourselves as a gateway, not a hurdle, a conduit for safe progress, not red tape that keeps progress sitting on the launch pad. In 2018, we started an intensive process to streamline our launch and reentry regulations so we could create an environment to enable economic growth and innovation, minimize uncertainty, protect safety, security, and foreign policy interests, and be a leader in the commercial space transportation sector. To these ends, we published a final rule to streamline our primary launch and reentry regulations into a single performance-based part to better fit today's fast-evolving and growing commercial space transportation industry. We are currently developing and publishing advisory circulars to provide operators with additional guidance on how to meet the requirements of this new rule. This guidance includes safety procedures and practices for minimizing hazards and enhancing safety. Through these proactive efforts, we seek to put real action to the department's mission of developing the safest, most efficient, and modern transportation system in the world. And we continually analyze the regulatory needs of the industry for both public safety and an optimized regulatory framework. To that end, we're currently considering regulations for orbital debris mitigation during launch and reentry operations. This evaluation will include considerations of the risk to people on the ground and can inform the risk to commercial aviation. We're not alone in looking to the future. The Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, ComStack, has recommended we specifically consider revising the rules regarding financial responsibility. So we'll take a hard look at Part 440. This review will help ensure the public has the appropriate protections while also evaluating whether or not the rule has kept pace with industry. It will make sure the industry has clarity and flexibility to achieve the regulatory performance objectives without undue burden. Spaceports are in many ways the front door to this industry, and we want U.S. leadership in space and on the ground. Without the proper infrastructure, commercial space won't have the foundation to make the jump from being a great idea to being the consistent, well-established mode of transportation we all know it can be. Spaceports aren't just for takeoffs and touchdowns. They're also economic and technology hubs just waiting to become a success story. We've taken action to share information broadly on the capabilities of U.S. spaceports. Our web-based spaceport directory outlines U.S. spaceport infrastructure and capabilities and the services provided by FAA licensed spaceports, federal launch ranges, and private commercial spaceports. We're literally putting spaceports on the map. The FAA also considers integrating commercial space operations into the National Airspace System a top priority. We are actively working on solutions to the issue of how commercial space will continue to grow alongside commercial and general aviation, and drones. For example, we continue to develop and implement the Space Data Integrator. This safety-based technology, which will automate the current manual processes, will enable the FAA to track in real time a space mission's progress as it flies through the airspace. When deployed, this technology will enable the FAA to better manage the airspace that must be closed to other users and more quickly release airspace restrictions as a mission progresses. In other words, fully integrating commercial space transportation into the NAS. In short, we're on the fast track to safely integrate commercial space into the system while enabling continued U.S. leadership in this transportation sector. We will continue to assess our entire regulatory framework in light of the industry's innovation and growth, and look forward to working with Congress and industry to strike the appropriate regulatory balance. In other words, the right regulations of the right scope at the right time. Mr. Chair, this concludes my testimony, and I'll be glad to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Monteith. Now, as chair, I recognize Ms. Krause from the GAO for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Chairman DeFazio, ranking members Graves and Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss today's commercial space transportation industry and FAA's role. Since FAA first assumed regulatory responsibility in 1995, this industry has experienced substantial growth, especially in the more recent years. Over time, commercial launch providers have made hundreds of launches involving carrying astronauts and supplies to and from the International Space Station and delivering thousands of satellites that support global television, high-speed internet, weather forecasts, and much more. In 2020, FAA oversaw a record number of launches and reentries. These operations are forecasted to grow as new space applications emerge, such as human space tourism, and demand continues to increase for services that depend on space transportation. My testimony today is based on our work since 2006 on FAA's efforts to respond to the changing commercial space transportation environment. It focuses on 3 areas. 1, FAA's efforts to update regulations. 2, challenges FAA faces regulating an industry that continues to grow and evolve. And 3, steps FAA has taken to help ensure it is positioned to respond to industry changes. First, industry developments have necessitated that FAA review and update its regulations. Most recently, FAA focused on its launch and reentry licensing regulations, consolidating multiple regulations and replacing prescriptive requirements with a performance-based regulatory framework to help better accommodate industry changes. Given that focus, FAA placed on hold revisions to other regulations, including those related to site operator licensing, which have been in place since 2000, and financial responsibility, which ensures a balance of risk between the federal government and launch companies and contain key elements not updated since 1988. FAA plans to prioritize and review these regulations following its licensing efforts, which aligns with the recommended priorities of its Industry Advisory Committee. As FAA adapts its regulations, it also faces ongoing oversight challenges. One key challenge we previously identified is whether and when to regulate the safety of crew and spaceflight participants. While companies have announced plans to take tourists to space within the next several years, FAA is prohibited by statute from regulating crew and passenger safety before 2023, except in response to events that caused or posed a risk of serious or fatal injury. In its February 2019 report to Congress, FAA concluded that no commercial human spaceflight activities had advanced to a stage that would necessitate a new safety framework. However, in anticipation of the moratorium expiring, FAA has taken some steps, including working with industry to develop and disseminate human spaceflight best practices. In addition, the rise of space tourism may require a re-examination of FAA's dual role of overseeing the safety of commercial space launches and promoting the industry. A 2008 statutorily mandated report concluded that there was no compelling reason to remove FAA's promotional role through 2012, but recommended that DOT periodically review its dual role, specifically for safety and promotion of human spaceflight. Given the time passed since the last examination and the moratorium on regulating spaceflight safety is due to expire, such a review may be warranted. Finally, FAA has taken some steps to help the agency keep pace with industry changes. For example, in response to recommendations we made in 2015 and 2019, FAA assessed its workforce to identify skills and competencies that are needed and is improving its workload projections to better account for the full range of its regulatory activities. Such efforts are critical for ensuring FAA strategically aligns its workforce with evolving industry demands. FAA has also made progress in developing procedures, technologies, and industry coordination to reduce inefficiencies and safely integrating commercial space users into the national airspace system. These efforts are promising, but full and efficient integration of all users of the national airspace system is years away and will require continued work and focus. In closing, the commercial space transportation industry provides services that are essential to many aspects of government, business, and society, and these services are expected to increase. FAA's role is fundamental to the continued safe growth of the industry. It is critical for FAA to maintain progress and ensure its efforts anticipate and respond to industry changes. This concludes my statement. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Krause. I appreciate that very much. And now we'll turn to member questions for panel one. And with that, the chair recognizes the chair of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio from Oregon. Pete.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Monteith, I mentioned it in my opening remarks. We had heard, I think, at a hearing in 16 about the development of the space data integrator. It's now 21, and yet, the officials have told the GAO that they still plan to begin implementing this technology. Can you give me a timeline for where this is in development and when we can expect it?
Sir, I can give you a little bit of an overview of it, but not a specific time frame. One of the things that I did when I joined the FAA a little over 2 years ago was took this program, which had been developed by my organization and had not made a whole lot of progress, and asked our Chief Operating Officer, Tory, to take this task on. She has, and we have seen tremendous growth or progress in the development of the system. So much so that we expect in the next few months to have the first operational test of it. Now, the system has been operating in a shadow mode, and we expect, like I said, in the next few months to have the first operational test, and we will be taking live data, ingesting it into our system, with the goal of reducing the airspace that must be segregated and really integrate commercial space into the system.
Okay. I think that's absolutely critical as we're going to have more and more launches, and we don't want to be diverting and delaying flights for people who can't afford $500,000 for a ticket. Ms. Krause, as I mentioned at the beginning, I stripped away FAA's dual mandate for commercial aircraft. Unfortunately, it took a horrible tragedy for people to admit there was a problem and accept my amendment. And you did state that a re-examination dual role may be warranted as the industry continues to evolve. Could you just elaborate a little bit on why you think we need to re-examine?
Yeah, the last review, as I mentioned in my opening statement, was in 2008, where DOT concluded that there was no compelling reason to remove the promotional role from FAA through 2012. It also, that report recommended that they periodically review the promotional role and safety role, particularly as it relates to human spaceflight. And so given the time that's passed since that review and the developments in the industry, as well as a moratorium expiring, another review may be warranted.
Okay. And the FAA hasn't revisited this in that interim period?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Is that correct, Mr. Monteith, that you haven't revisited this as was recommended, that you should periodically look at it?
Sir, I don't believe we have formally revisited, but we do pay attention to this. And when we look at our encourage, facilitate, promote, everything is based on safety standards, and cooperation coordination with the industry. And we don't really do promotion in the form of like marketing.
Yeah, but the concern is like when the FAA starts talking about Boeing as a customer and we find undue influence over the inspectors and we find managers overruling people who found critical problems with the MAX and subsequently people died. It's a creep that can happen and it's, you know, they're not customers. They're, you know, the commercial aviation industry is a regulated entity. And we'll have to be watching commercial space very closely. And finally, you know, we wrote, the chair and I wrote a letter on March 25th regarding the SpaceX, you know, launching without authorization. What has SpaceX done to deal with the operational concerns you had and essentially the cultural issues that you flagged? Are you satisfied that they're now fully compliant and they've cleaned things up?
Yes, sir, I am. And we would not have cleared them to start flight operations again had I not been confident that they had modified their procedures effectively and addressed the safety culture issues that we saw during the events of Starship serial number 8 or SN8. Okay,
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Graves of Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Monteith, for several years now, Congress has had a lot of discussion about which civil agency should be responsible for the provision of space situational awareness services. We haven't come to a decision yet, and I'm curious to your thoughts and response, and if you think the FAA would be able to execute that mission if Congress decided that it should be your responsibility.
Sir, great question. From my perspective, the most important thing is that whichever civil agency is tasked with this responsibility, it's done right. And so that likely means a change in statute and sufficient budget to get the job done. If Congress were to decide that this is a responsibility for the Department of Transportation, I am confident that the FAA would step up to the plate and we could accomplish the mission.
Thank you. Another question for you. Another concern we have, as I covered in the opening statement, was the reentry of space debris. If that mission, and of course the impact on airspace and aircraft, if that mission were ultimately given to the FAA, do you think that AST and the Air Traffic Organization would be capable of working together to accomplish that mission or administer it?
Sir, if Congress did task us with that mission, I am confident that while it is difficult, that with the appropriate authorization and appropriation, we would get it done. And I can tell you the relationship that we have with the Air Traffic Organization, there is no daylight between Terry Bristol and I on how we consider the safety of the NAS and integrating commercial space into the NAS. We are full partners with the Air Traffic Organization.
Thank you. With the bulk of Part 450 rulemaking behind us, there are a lot of other commercial space transportation regulations that may need similar revisiting, may be outdated or overly burdensome. Are there any of them that come to mind for you in terms of ones that you think deserve revisiting or would be a priority?
Sir, we are evaluating that. As I mentioned in my opening statement, we're ready to press forward with the orbital debris rule, which really concerns upper stages and debris coming off upper stages. Secondly, we want to take a real hard look at Part 440, financial responsibility as recommended by ComStack. And then we also know we do need to look at our spaceport regulations, which really have not kept up with the state of the industry. But as a regulator, I think it's important for us to continually look at these and not wait 20 years to repromulgate a regulation that has grown stale.
Thank you. As you know, in 2018, the committee provided the Secretary with the authority to create aerospace rulemaking committees. Will the FAA consider asking the Secretary to convene an ARC for commercial space transportation rulemaking to help the FAA develop proposed rules?
In a word, sir, yes. I think it's critical that we have full industry involvement as we develop these regulations and full public comment period so we can have the best, most effective and efficient regulations that we can possibly develop.
Thanks. Last one for you, General, and I appreciate your answers. As I covered in my opening statement, there's been, during the commercial human spaceflight learning period, industry is supposed to be working towards sort of a consensus on safety standards. As I said, the momentum appears to be moving in the right direction. Where do you think the focus over the next 24 months or so should be for those efforts?
Sir, you know, I understand why the learning period was established when it was, but as was previously mentioned, with 3 companies likely flying commercial spaceflight participants this year and a 4th next year, I think the landscape is changing. And I think it's important that we relook at some of those restrictions or in this case, the moratorium. I also think that even with no change there, we still need to continue pressing forward to develop those consensus standards and to refresh our guidelines for commercial human spaceflight.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and first questions are for Ms. Krause. The FAA has taken steps to reduce inefficiencies in the NAS. In your testimony, you say this progress is promising, but full integration is years away. In your opinion, is the progress made by FAA sufficient, and what are the hurdles to that?
We looked back in 2019, we had done a review looking at integration efforts and certainly heard from both industry and FAA an acknowledgement that their current approach was creating inefficiencies. I think since we've done that work, FAA has taken a number of steps, both on the procedural and developing technologies, as well as starting to work through some bodies to do additional industry coordination. And those are what I mean in terms of promising. Those are the types of things that are needed to really get us closer and move towards more full integration in the NAS.
So the FAA has given you a date of this summer, I guess, which is just a few days away, to stand up the first of a series of committees to establish a forum for integration of the NAS with commercial space activities. What is an appropriate timeline for other needed committees or activities in this area?
I think it would, that's timelines would have to be worked closely with both FAA and sort of the industry and figuring out all the different components that need to come together. It is a complex issue to work through, and technologies and systems need to be further developed so that, there's better data to be able to assess risk and look at opportunities to further create efficiencies as well as safely integrating different aircraft in the NAS.
Could you, and then as well, could you be clearer? It's in your written testimony. I wasn't quite sure from your oral testimony about the FAA's role prior to 2023 in looking at the safety of crew and spaceflight participants. Should they get some work done now in the event of action? Are they not allowed to take action before then? Can you be clearer about that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the regulations allow them to respond to issues where if there is an accident or a mishap, they can look at the issue of the design that caused that. There's also things that the FAA can do and is doing in terms of working with industry to develop, best practices that they can disseminate amongst the industry, as well as was discussed, consensus standards that I think will really help inform where things might head should the moratorium expire.
Thank you. Mr. Monteith, the FAA is responsible for clearing the NAS for military and other government launches. Is there anything different you're expecting with commercial launches in terms of either process or, I guess mainly process? Are there lessons to be learned from that will be applied specifically to commercial launches?
Yes, sir, there will, and it'll actually be, it can be applied in both directions. And even though Space Data Integrator is just getting ready to do the first operational test, the Air Traffic Organization has already been leaning forward and implementing concepts like time-based launch procedures. We know there are specific events during a launch countdown that trigger timelines to launch. Using that information, the ATO can adjust the airspace that is restricted and reduce the amount of restricted airspace and the time that it's actually restricted.
Thank you. Before I turn to Mr. Perry, I just want to let folks know that we're supposed to have first votes between 240 and 250 or something along those lines, and there's going to be several votes. I'm still trying to determine whether we should just plow through this or recess, but when I decide, I'll let you know. So with that, I'll turn it to Mr. Perry for 5 minutes from Pennsylvania.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Monteith, the Biden administration has requested a nearly $5 million increase in the budget for the operations account of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. What is your plan to prioritize these funds towards licensing efforts to ensure that the office is in compliance with the statutory time limits for launch licensing in the Commercial Space Launch Act?
Sir, appreciate the question. We have taken a look at every function that we have in the office to maximize our efficiency and effectiveness. We are hiring to our full authorized level this year. For the first time in the history of the office, we have actually been able to sustain over 100 full-time employees. And our efforts are geared primarily towards that licensing effort. We've been very successful thus far, but as we've identified earlier, just since this time last year, our launch cadence has doubled in just 1 year. And so we have got a lot of work ahead of us, and we are being proactive as we can to turn this problem so we do not become the impediment to industry.
All right. Well, then
Safety.
yeah, just stay with me here. On a similar note, what efforts have you taken to date to ensure compliance with the statutory requirements related to timely and responsive license review and approvals, and what are the office's future plans to improve timeliness and responsiveness?
Sir, if I understand the question correctly, it's our 180-day statutory requirement to have a license evaluated once it is determined to be complete. And I can only think of currently, I believe, one license where that did not occur, and that had to do with in the environmental review process.
Okay. All right, and continuing on, the Trump administration required the Department of Transportation to rewrite the launch and reentry rules after nearly 2 decades, almost no modification. The industry is moving quickly and innovating at a speed to which the federal government, quite honestly, is probably unaccustomed, including developing unique and untraditional launch systems. How's the FAA working with the industry to ensure that the new Part 450 will accommodate innovation and advancement without hindering the industry?
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, Part 450 was written to be performance-based as opposed to prescriptive, which it was in the past, which really put a dampener on innovation. We have worked with industry on Part 450. The feedback we've gotten from industry, we've done a full 3-day workshop on the new 450 itself. Got very positive feedback. That workshop was with industry. We've also done the same thing, a 1-day workshop with our international partners, and we were working with industry as we develop right now it's 27 advisory circulars that will help guide them through and provide a means of compliance for specific parts of Part 450.
So, and keeping kind of with that theme, what do you think needs to be done to facilitate further mutually beneficial cooperation between the agency and industry? And do you feel that there are any barriers hindering those efforts?
Sir, I don't believe there are barriers. We have open and honest communication with our industry partners, and the industry companies know that I am always available to take their calls and talk to them and discuss any concerns they have about the way we conduct business, or the regulatory way ahead.
Well, sir, thank you for your service. I noticed that you commanded the 45th Space Wing in Florida. During your time there, you oversaw the very first rocket landing, which has since occurred more than 80 times. The reusable rocket, as well as other industry-led innovative technologies and launch systems, continue to drive down the cost of space access, delivering tangible benefits to the American consumer, the economy, and our national security. Given your background, can you elaborate in the short time that we have left on the importance of these innovations in supporting our national security and economic circumstances?
Sir, if we want to stay the world leader in this transportation sector, innovation is critical, just like STEM is and diversity is as well. I oversaw the first 23 booster landings, and I can tell you personally, it is a game changer.
Well, thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Representative Perry. The chair now recognizes Representative Payne of New Jersey for 5 minutes. Representative Payne.
Mr. Chairman, if I could yield and come back at a later time.
It's possible, but you might want to take this opportunity now, just in terms of, if not, we'll go to Mr. Brown. All right, we'll go to Mr. Brown from Maryland for 5 minutes. Mr. Brown? You're on mute, Mr. Brown. Representative Brown, you're on mute if you're okay. Representative Payne, you have 5 minutes right now if you want them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank you for having this this hearing, and I want to ask. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Can you hear me?
You are
Okay.
good.
I'm sorry. Mr. Monteith, commercial space exploration is the next frontier of American discovery, but it is our responsibility to ensure that it's conducted with safety at the forefront. FAA and NASA have regulations and norms developed over decades to ensure safe and orderly operations. Commercial space flight is the only sector in its second decade of operations, and we must make sure that this safety culture can overcome the move fast and break things mantra of startups. Based on the FAA and NASA approach to safety, how do we instill those values in commercial space transportation?
Sir, that's a great question. And from my perspective, these companies, while they are trying to go quick, they are safe. At the heart of their business, they are concerned about safety. If we get any inkling that they're not concerned about safety, that's when we step in. The FAA has licensed 404 launches, commercial launches, since our inception. And we have never had a fatality or casualty or serious injury to the uninvolved public. And that doesn't mean things haven't gone wrong. About 15% of our flights, we declare a mishap. In other words, something didn't quite go wrong. Some of them, sometimes it's an engine that's not quite working right. Sometimes it's very spectacular that you'll see across the internet. But what every single one of those mishaps has in common is they failed safely and nobody was injured. So safety, as my administrator says, is our North Star, and we stay laser focused, my entire team, on the safety of what is inherently a dangerous operation every single day, sir.
Unlike other members, on this committee, represent a district that contains a major airport. how does the FAA plan to deal with an increasing number of space launches to avoid major service disruptions and safety concerns related to air travel?
Yes, sir. We work hand in hand with our counterparts, and I meet personally with my peers, both the chief operating officer and the head of airports, as we work through these. We also have our teams. Anytime a license application or a concept for a launch operator comes in, we work throughout that entire process with our counterparts within the FAA to make sure that, to the extent that we can, that these operations are integrated, and at the foundation, they are always, always, always safe. So for instance, you would not expect to see an operation, say in the middle of the country, that is launching Saturn V type rockets. Right. Because we're working together to ensure that doesn't happen.
Excellent. Ms. Krause, to develop eventual regulation of commercial space transportation, federal agencies will need relevant information and studies of pertinent issues. What areas in commercial space transportation need further investigation and evaluation, and how can Congress help in these efforts?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think as I was, one area we've looked at in the past is FAA's workforce and AST's efforts to make sure that they have the skills in place. That's an area that, to continue to have attention on, and I know FAA continues to evolve and, monitor and kind of ongoing analysis of how their workforce is ready. So that's something to really pay attention to, because you need the skills in place in order to carry out, respond to, and adapt to changes in the industry. I also mentioned, it may warrant another review of the dual mandate as the industry develops, and particularly as the human spaceflight industry and continues to develop.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Payne. We're going to try to keep going here. And if Representative Steele is available for questions, Representative Steele. Is Representative Balderson available? Okay. I would ask if I can ask the ranking. If we announce consent, we do have a few folks on this side of the aisle who are here and for questions. Can I get them started? I know it's out of order, so that's an okay from the ranking. So we'll go with Mr. Kahele.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses today for participating in this very important conversation. I guess my question would be for Mr. Monteith, similar to the previous question. Maybe mine will touch more on the regulatory framework. On page 6 in your testimony, you described commercial space operations as currently being treated as a special case in which air traffic controllers block off large sections of airspace for extended periods of times for a single launch. As the number of commercial space operation grows exponentially, maybe explain a little differently than your previous explanation about the next steps for the FAA in terms of the regulatory framework. I know from your testimony, 14 CFR Part 450 was adopted, but how do you see the integration of commercial spaceflight and the regulatory aspect of it and that evolution to integrate it into the national airspace system? When I look at this, I think of the challenges we had and still have in integrating unmanned aircraft systems into the national airspace system. So could you discuss a little bit of your thoughts on that aspect?
Yes, sir, and appreciate the question. As I stated in my oral testimony, integration of commercial space into the NAS is a top priority for the FAA. And with the development of the Space Data Integrator, it is more about technology and capability than it is about a new regulatory framework. As we started this journey, the amount of time it took between when we realized a rocket had a mishap or a catastrophic anomaly to when we could actually get commands into the flight deck took historically 14 to 18 minutes, which is why we had to separate or segregate a very large swath of airspace for a significant amount of time. When SDI is completely implemented, right now the goal is, because we're using machine to machine as opposed to manual inputs, that goal would be less than 1 minute, which really at that point gets you to where you're truly integrating the airspace for these complementary operations.
What do you think as the commercial space operations and industry grows? Obviously, there are more preferred and desired locations for space launches. You know, typically Florida, Cape Canaveral, California, Vandenberg. Are there other areas of the country that, you know, we're looking for an increase in commercial space launches, or are there areas that we can, you know, fairly say like this is where it would be most highly concentrated and therefore affecting the commercial aircraft activity in those areas?
Yes, sir. You know, there are more optimal locations to have a spaceport at. Of course, being on the coast is one because of downrange debris. Closer to the equator, so you use the rotation of the Earth as an energy boost to get into geosynchronous orbit where our communication satellites are, or big ones are. So there are certainly optimal places. Right now, we're not at capacity, but at some point with these locations that you mentioned, we will be at capacity. Right now, we currently have 12 FAA licensed spaceports. I believe 5 are actively conducting launch operations. So we have 7 that are still waiting for launch operators to come to their facilities. But I see this industry is, if anything, accelerating as opposed to slowing down, which I believe it'll be even more critical to take a look at our spaceport infrastructure to ensure that it can handle the growth and that we can remain a global leader in this transportation sector, sir.
If one of those licenses does not exist, of those 12 licensees, do you, and how do you foresee Hawaii playing a role in commercial space launch future activities?
Well, sir, since I grew up on Oahu, I would love to see a spaceport in Hawaii, just personally. But there are opportunities, of course, all consistent with safety and our environmental regulations that would allow us to put, particularly on areas with plenty of coast like Hawaii has, could potentially support a spaceport operation.
All right, thank you so much. Mahalo.
Thank you. And Chair calls on Mr. Garamendi for 5 minutes. I would note, just a heads up, although there are 4 minutes and 30 seconds left in the vote, a total of 56 people total have voted. So, Mr. Garamendi, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 sets of questions. One is who pays for all this? The commercial space operators or the taxpayers? I'm going to let that one hang there. I don't think that the answer is going to be found in this hearing, but I think it needs to be out there. This is going to become much more expensive as more and more space flights occur. Secondly, this is an issue, Mr. Chairman, that you and I may know a little bit about, or maybe we don't know enough about it. In 2018, General Hayden said that space awareness, that is what's going on in space, space junk, space satellites, all that, could be handled by a non-defense government agency. More recently, in fact, it's been in the last within the last 3 months, this issue has come back, and the last I heard from the military is maybe not. Maybe the Department of Defense needs to stay on top of this issue for a whole variety of reasons, many of which you and I have heard on the Armed Services Committee. I think this issue remains unresolved despite President Trump's 2018 directive. I'd like to see more discussion about this. I'd like to hear from the Department of Defense as they view this matter in the more recent Space Command and Space Force that now exists. So I'm going to let it go at that. These are two questions that are out there. If any of the witnesses have an answer, good. Otherwise, you and I are going to leave and vote. Did I see the chairman leaving? He ran away, did he? Any of the witnesses want to respond? Who pays, and does this space situational awareness reside in the Department of Defense or Commerce?
Sir, having done that mission when I was in the Air Force, I can tell you, while I was in, the discussions made perfect sense that some of this could definitely be offloaded to a civil organization. The Department of Defense will still continue to get exquisite space situational awareness data. The issue is whether or not they can ingest all of the commercially available data that's out there right now, because of the restrictions on what their systems also do from a defense perspective. On the civil side, you can ingest all of that data and provide more accurate location of where satellites are so that you can start walking down a path where you can better have collision avoidance for these objects on orbit.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you very much. Are there any of our GOP colleagues logged on at this point? My understanding is there's not, but I want to ask to confirm. Any Republican members available to ask questions? All right, if not, I will proceed with my own questions then. And this is a continuation of some questions that were asked earlier by Chairman DeFazio. These are for Administrator Monteith and Ms. Krause. Through its licensing authorities, the FAA is required to ensure and protect public health and safety, national security, and foreign policy interests of the United States. Yet at the same time, the FAA is required to encourage, facilitate, and promote the commercial space transportation industry. And so this creates a dual mandate for the organization. So following up on Chairman DeFazio's questions, I want to hear each of your own individual views about this dual mandate and how this dual mandate best serves, or can it serve, the interests of the federal government, commercial space launch industry, and most importantly, the American people.
Sir, if you'd like me to start, what I would say, and we take both of those mandates seriously, but for me, it's an if-then. If the first is accomplished, we're able to do the second, because everything evolves around safety. And so when we encourage and facilitate this industry, it's more about, from my perspective, it's more about facilitation. It's ensuring that we've got the right regulations of the right scope at the right time to ensure safety, while also allowing these companies to innovate and grow and continue to lead on a global stage. We don't do, quite frankly, a whole lot of encouraging, and for promotion, it is all about promoting safety standards and consensus standards and working with industry for that, as opposed to what would traditionally be considered potentially marketing, which we really don't do.
Thank you, Ms. Krause. Could I get your answer on the issue of the dual mandate that's currently in place?
Sure. I mean, we've previously emphasized that, it's important that both FAA and Congress remain vigilant, ensuring that there's no inappropriate role between FAA and the commercial space industry. As I had mentioned earlier, the last review of looking at the dual role was back in 2008, where it concluded that there was no compelling reason to separate out the promotional role from FAA through 2012. But really, given the changes that there have been in the industry, as well as the moratorium expiring and the need to periodically, or the recommendation coming out of that report to periodically review this, we think that taking another look at this issue may be warranted.
Thank you very much. Over the last decade, there has been a steady growth in the industry and the number of launches licensed by the FAA. Just 5 years ago, there were 9 launches. Last year, there was a record 39, representing a nearly 400% increase since 2015. This year, 39 launches have been licensed to date, and we are only midway through the year. In addition to the increase in launch licenses, the number of launch companies, especially for small satellites, is growing. And I want to ask each of you about workforce issues associated with this exponential growth in the industry. Is the FAA workforce keeping pace with its growth? And what has been the overall impact on the FAA's operations and licensing activities in light of this fast growth? And that's for either witness.
Sir, so far we've been able to keep up, but it is a challenge. I can tell you from the skill sets that we need that are mostly STEM related. We are just one of many organizations that are looking for a same small pool of talented individuals. Of course, you got industry that frequently can offer more compensation, and on the government side, while it's great and exciting to be a regulator, I have to compete against NASA, the Air Force, and now the U.S. Space Force. But with all that said, what we offer is the ability for folks to come in and learn the entire industry. And then either they'll stay with us for 20 or 30 years or potentially go to industry and take our safety foundation with them and the understanding of why regulations are important. But as we continue to grow, I see this as becoming a greater and greater challenge for all of us if we cannot solve the problem we have with not enough folks in STEM.
Thank you, Administrator Monteith. Ms. Krause, any thoughts about workforce issues as it relates to the growth in this industry?
Yeah, that's an issue we've looked at closely and have identified some opportunities for FAA to more strategically manage its workforce and be in a position to respond to changes in the industry. The FAA has responded to those, recommendations and continues to work on them. Things like having a better sense of the time that their staff is using and what kind of time is being spent on different activities, as well as the skills and competencies that are needed. But we're looking for FAA to really follow through on the other recommendations, which is understanding workload metrics, projections, so that they can get these people on board and trained up and ready to respond and to changes in the industry.
I want to thank both of our panelists in the first panel for your important testimony here today. Your contribution to today's discussion has been very informative and very helpful. Because votes have been called, we have an 8-vote series right now. Some of our colleagues were not able to ask questions at the first panel. So as a result, the committee was going to stand in recess until 5 minutes after the end of the last vote series today. We hope it is around 5:15, and at that point, we will call upon the second panel. Okay. Can I ask her, or is it too late?
Yeah, just ask.
Okay, I apologize. I've been told that my colleague, Congressman DeSaulnier, is on and ready to ask questions of our first panel. I appreciate that, and at that point, we'll stand in recess. Congressman.
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman. If you want to go to recess, I can wait, whatever is more convenient for you and the staff.
The issue would be if we recess, we're going to release these 2 witnesses.
Okay.
So I would say, if you want to ask questions of these witnesses, do it now, and then otherwise we can hold off to the second panel later.
I'll hold off till the second panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman Brents. We stand in recess until 5 minutes after the end of the last vote.
Call the committee back in from recess to continue the hearing on FAA's role, FAA's important role, critical role in commercial space launch. We're going to move to the second panel, and I'm going to, just a heads up, we're between a series of votes, so we have a little bit of time right now for this work. And we will go until the next round of votes is called. But we have a little bit of time. I just want to let folks know that. So I would know that the space launches can be vertical or horizontal. They are designed to meet different commercial needs, such as launching a GPS satellite into geostationary orbit or a new telescope to explore space. With that in mind, this subcommittee must consider the depth and the breadth of the industry being regulated. The experience of launch providers who have been in the business for some time, their experience has, through that experience, they've received, developed long-standing safety requirements and use existing standards, and that knowledge will be extremely helpful. That's why I am pleased to have on this panel Mr. Salvatore Bruno, the President and CEO of ULA, or United Launch Alliance. And I look forward to hearing from Mr. Bruno about what is needed from the FAA to support effective yet efficient launch and spaceport licensing, and how vital that is to the success of the industry. Mr. Frank DiBello, President and CEO of Space Florida, is on the panel, and we will hear from him. I'd like to hear from him his evaluation of the present and future of FAA launch and spaceport regulations. Recent figures indicate that the airline industry and passenger travel are rebounding from COVID-19 pandemic. So consequently, it's important to ask how to fully and safely integrate growing airspace operations like commercial space launch with existing airspace users. I'm glad, therefore, to welcome Captain Joe DePete of the Airline Pilots Association to hear that perspective. And the perspective of new entrants into the commercial space operations field also play a key role in this discussion. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Mike Moses, the President of Space Missions and Safety of Virgin Galactic, to hear their unique priorities. So as nascent operations and technologies are integrated into the complex national airspace system, the safety of all who fly and those on the ground remain a top priority. This Congress, this administration, and the industry and the workforce must work together to move forward as we embark on the next chapter of U.S. airspace. And I would note before I introduce or go to the witnesses that this committee takes this oversight very seriously. We do not believe that we have jurisdiction over space, but you have to travel through airspace to get to space. What I like to think of as our space to get to space. And so this is why this hearing is so critically important, to hear about the FAA's role and hear about how the industry is working with the FAA and what needs to be better to ensure that the controlled airspace, the national airspace system, is controlled in a safe manner that facilitates the industry. So with that, that was, for the record, the conclusion of my opening statement and from previously. And so I want to just move now to the panelists. And the first panelist will be Mr. Bruno of United Launch Alliance. Mr. Bruno, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Larson, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Members Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to speak on a matter of vital importance to our nation. The FAA's role in promoting U.S. commercial space transportation, ensuring public safety, and protecting the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States. I am privileged to represent United Launch Alliance's talented and dedicated team of women and men who are at the forefront of our industry. As president and CEO of ULA, it is my responsibility to be laser focused on providing reliable, affordable, and especially safe space transportation services. Having an unmatched record of 100% mission success across 144 launches for the Department of Defense, NASA, and commercial customers, ULA occupies a unique position and perspective in U.S. space transportation. Today, these missions launch on our Atlas V and Delta IV rockets, and soon we will debut the innovative Vulcan Centaur. U.S. leadership in space can only be maintained with an increasingly successful domestic commercial space transportation industry. That fact underscores the truly enormous importance of the FAA's licensing of launch, reentry, and spaceports while protecting national security and public safety. It is important to recognize that safety is as much in the interest of the commercial space transportation industry as it is in the interest of the general public. Any loss of life, damage to property, or environmental degradation caused by space launches, reentries, or spaceport activities could harm our entire industry by reducing public and political confidence, which could lead to increased restrictions and related costs. This in turn would have an adverse impact on the commercial space and our overall national interest as space transportation would become more constrained and expensive. I am happy to report that the ULA safety record remains impeccable. The recent streamlining of launch and reentry regulations is a landmark example of how the FAA has contributed to the advancement of U.S. commercial space transportation while maintaining safety as paramount and protecting our national security and foreign policy interests. In order to maintain the integrity of the licensing process, we need effective enforcement. It may not be obvious, but the FAA has never denied an operational launch license. If the FAA has a concern with the ULA license, they promptly let us know, and we make sure the issue is resolved well in advance of launch. These regulations exist for a reason. Space launch is not as easy as we make it look. These are incredibly complex machines of enormous destructive potential. Industry is naturally going to trend towards pushing the boundaries. So it is vital that Congress provides FAA the support it needs to conduct effective oversight and enforcement of the licensing process. Responsible operators will comply with FAA regulations and licenses. Those who do not should face enforcement and impactful consequences. Other issues the FAA will play a role in addressing include human spaceflight safety, the integration of the National Airspace System, the protection of the orbital regime, and the protection of air traffic from an increase in re-entering space debris. I address these topics further in my written testimony. In closing, I wish to express my appreciation for your focus on the FAA and U.S. commercial space transportation. Your dedicated attention to this vitally important matter is indispensable to ensuring the continued support of Congress for the FAA and our industry. Again, thank you for inviting me to testify today. I look forward to answering all of your questions.
Thank you very much. Now, the chair will recognize Mr. Frank DiBello, President and CEO of Space Florida. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this invitation. I am honored to share a Florida perspective on a topic of great importance to our state and to the nation's leadership in space transportation. Space Florida is a public corporation and independent special district established to strengthen Florida's leadership in aerospace research, investment, exploration, and commerce. We actively support development of space transportation assets at the Cape Canaveral Spaceport and at other designated spaceport territories in the state. Florida hosts 4 of the 12 licensed commercial spaceports, and since 1989 has hosted over half of all FAA licensed launches. Of the 31 licensed launches so far this year, nearly 60% were launched from privately developed or operated facilities at the Cape Canaveral Spaceport, which includes the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Since January, launches from the Cape have demonstrated a cargo lifting capability of over 400 metric tons to orbit. Further, 50 or more launches a year from Florida will soon become the norm, and future projections far exceed that number. Years ago, Florida recognized this future and designated space transportation a distinct element of its strategic intermodal system. Space transportation is critical to our economy. Yet, we recognize it is still an emerging industry and requires care in allowing new systems entering the market to operate within a flexible regulatory framework. The FAA must continue to develop and maintain this framework to support U.S. industry growth in the face of global competition. With Florida's launch activity and busy air traffic corridors along our coast, we urge continued and increased FAA effort in technology and airspace management development to advance safe and efficient integration of space transportation with commercial aviation. Florida is already providing an operational environment where industry and FAA can develop and mature improvements to future systems and procedures. It is also worth noting that thanks in major part to more than $1.5 billion in commercial spaceport investment by Florida and its industry partners, we now have a landscape of new and redeveloped launch and landing capability on sites once used solely for government systems. States have a clear role to play in the evolution of U.S. space transportation capability. National space transportation policy directs federal agencies to provide access to launch ranges, purchase U.S. space transportation services, and refrain from activities that preclude, discourage, or compete with U.S. commercial space providers. These policies have fostered renewal and growth in America's space launch capability, but vital supporting ground infrastructure has not kept up at the same pace and is essential for future spaceport operations. The U.S. Department of Transportation should embrace space transportation as yet another modal element that is critical to the economic and security well-being of the nation, and ensure that these categories of supporting ground infrastructure are included in the nation's infrastructure investment planning. We urge Congress to authorize and fund a program aimed at enabling America's space transportation leadership. Such a program should be funded on a recurring basis and provide assistance to sites with demonstrated need by operational activity or market demand to advance objectives of national strategy. In 2018, the FAA chartered an aviation rule committee to provide input on streamlined regulations for commercial space transportation. Space Florida was honored to participate. While our industry continues to evaluate how the revised regulations will affect operations, there still remains much to be done. We recognize that the FAA must adapt and grow its workforce to meet evolutionary regulatory changes. I want to commend the progress made by Associate Administrator Monteith in reorganizing its staffing to respond to these rapidly growing industry needs. In this context, we believe FAA should focus on protection of the uninvolved public, people, and property outside the controlled boundaries of a federal, state, or private launch site. Launch site operators could assume greater responsibility for regulating activities of spaceport personnel, both directly and not directly participating in the license activity, allowing greater FAA attention to the public outside the spaceport fence line. Continued U.S. leadership depends on a regulatory structure that achieves public safety while remaining flexible to enable new technologies and operational approaches that advance U.S. capabilities. I urge this committee to ensure that FAA engages in this unique industry in future rulemaking early and often, so that companies most knowledgeable about risks and the technologies involved can help inform development of FAA rules that both regulators and operators will live and succeed by. Thank you again for the opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiBello. I now turn to Captain Joe DePete, President of the Airline Pilots Association International. Captain, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves and members of the subcommittee. I'm Captain Joe DePete, President of the Airline Pilots Association International, which represents more than 59,000 pilots who fly for 35 airlines. Now, let me make clear that ALPA supports a safe integration of new and expanding users of the national airspace, including commercial spaceflight operations. As the world's largest non-governmental aviation safety organization, we are equally committed to ensuring that new entrants do not create new risks. U.S. air transportation is the safest in the world, and this subcommittee's leadership is among the reasons why. Another reason is the highly unionized U.S. aviation workforce that has put safety first over the past century of flight. As ALPA celebrates our 90th anniversary, we recognize our responsibility to share the lessons pilots have learned and make certain that the United States continues to put safety first in the national airspace, a critical component of U.S. transportation infrastructure. The FAA forecasts an increase in U.S. launch activities by as much as 100% by 2025. In response, the FAA must build upon a pattern of collaboration by the aviation and aerospace sectors. For years, ALPA has facilitated data sharing between the aviation and aerospace industries. For example, ALPA and the Commercial Spaceflight Federation held a 2019 symposium that culminated in a joint statement affirming that both sectors would work towards a common goal. ALPA believes now more than ever that the FAA, industry, and labor can work together to create a national space integration strategy. In 2018, ALPA issued a white paper that called for such a strategy to include establishing a proactive, risk-predictive safety culture in spaceflight operations through safety management systems for manufacturing, operations, and spaceport licensing, creating commercial astronaut licensing and training standards that align with those of other professionals who operate in the national airspace, and developing orbital debris reentry standards for planned and unplanned reentries that could affect public safety. To that end, I'd like to state ALPA's support for the Aerospace Debris Safety Act. A national strategy will enable all airspace users to create a shared mental model for the future. In the meantime, the FAA can enhance collaboration without additional funding or authorization by creating an advisory structure that brings together commercial space, drone, and aviation operators, which all use the airspace but currently provide input separately. By creating a national integration strategy, the FAA will also reduce emissions. We urge the FAA to renew and review launch emission standards and consider lower emission fuels. As the United States continues to segregate rather than integrate commercial space, we needlessly increase emissions during launches by forcing aircraft to fly around segregated airspace or wait until it reopens. Right now, airline pilots already face operational issues involving spaceflight, as recently demonstrated by uncontrolled space debris reentry events. We believe the FAA must take actions including establishing launch planning and recovery standards, creating standards to make certain that very large pieces of space debris re-enter at a predefined location and time, and requiring notification of pilots, airlines, and controllers not directly involved in a space launch about the risk level changes in that airspace. ALPA recognizes that uncontrolled space debris reentry is, of course, a global safety issue, and we recently sent a letter to the ICAO Secretary General calling for international actions to be taken. As we consider the promise, but also the challenges of increased spaceflight, the aviation and aerospace sectors have a proven model to follow to ensure safety. Through the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, labor, airlines, manufacturers, industry, and the FAA have collaborated to address risk in aviation with remarkable success. A similar data-driven, risk-based construct will help create a proactive safety culture for commercial spaceflight as well. Thank you for the subcommittee's recognition of the crucial role airline pilots play in maintaining the safety of air transportation as we continue to drive the U.S. public health and economic recovery, keep supply chains open, and safely transport our passengers. Thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Captain DePete. I now want to turn to Mike Moses, President of Virgin Galactic. Mr. Moses, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, Chairman DeFazio, and members of the Aviation Subcommittee and staff for the opportunity to testify to you all today. I am the President of Space Missions and Safety for Virgin Galactic. I joined the company in 2011 following a career at NASA where I worked on the Space Shuttle program, starting out in mission control in Houston and then eventually leading shuttle processing activities from the Kennedy Space Center. My tenure there at NASA gave me perspective, insight, and experience for operations planning and safe execution of human spaceflight, which is my top responsibility here at Virgin Galactic. Today, I would like to highlight the important policies that apply to Virgin Galactic and the commercial spaceflight industry that will help prioritize safety while promoting growth of the industry. Virgin Galactic was founded as the world's first commercial space line in 2004 with the ambitious mission of flying private astronauts to space. Our mission is to open frequent access to space while safely delivering a transformative spaceflight experience to our astronauts. Our system consists of 2 vehicles that take off and land on a runway rather than a launch pad. The mothership is a purpose-built jet aircraft with the job of carrying the spaceship to a launch altitude at 50,000 feet. The spaceship launches from there and transports 6 customers and scientific research safely and routinely to space and back. Our system is suborbital, so while we do not enter orbit around the Earth, our astronauts will experience several minutes of weightlessness as they float freely about the cabin, taking in the amazing views of Earth. We have had 3 space flights so far, most recently last month, and our company's North Star is and always will be safety, a mindset that we know is shared throughout the commercial space sector and by my fellow panelists. In fact, we are immensely proud that our latest flight to space from New Mexico marked the 400th launch licensed by the FAA, maintaining their perfect public safety record. The US is a global leader in commercial spaceflight, and the industry has indeed seen significant growth in the past decade. The success is intentional, made possible by the leadership, decision-making, and action of the Congress and federal agencies. Policies such as the learning period, informed consent, and risk-sharing liability regime have led the way for this explosive growth without compromising safety or innovation. Now is the time to build on that solid foundation to ensure continued success, particularly as we now look to taking humans to space. Commercial human spaceflight still is in its infancy. To date, we have only had Virgin Galactic's 3 suborbital missions and SpaceX's 3 human orbital government missions that have flown humans. A major step in building upon the foundation was the Part 450 regulations to streamline into a single licensing regime. As Virgin Galactic and other companies work through these new regulations, we need to have the FAA with the resources required to continue its track record of excellent industry support in order to address unforeseen issues that may arise from this new regime quickly and in a manner that will not impact their protection of public safety nor delay commercial business. On the safety front, the FAA regularly engages industry through an advisory committee called ComStack. As a current member of that committee myself, I'm proud to share that we work closely with the FAA on the development of voluntary industry consensus standards, including those related to human spaceflight. One such effort is via ASTM, who are actively developing and publishing standards. Together, the industry is constantly innovating safety systems, designs, and operations. And while all this progress is beneficial, as noted earlier, the industry still is in its early days, and more time is needed to have informed discussions on what regulatory frameworks should look like in the future to support human spaceflight, looking beyond just public safety. Extending the learning period would allow these discussions to take place in Congress in partnership with industry and the FAA. Finally, as this committee is definitely aware, efforts to address our nation's infrastructure and development maintenance are underway, and space must definitely be part of that discussion. Protecting and improving that infrastructure is critical to life in the 21st century. This is an exciting time not only for Virgin Galactic, but for the entire industry as we mark milestones towards human spaceflight. The committee's tireless work and progress on aviation and aerospace regulation is imperative and very much appreciated. We often call out the innovation that is occurring in spaceflight technology, but innovation can and should be applied to the policies that shape the sector as well. We look forward to continuing to work closely with all of you in the pursuit of these highest levels of safety and innovation. Thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone for meeting the 5-minute timeline or beating the 5-minute timeline as well. We're going to go now to member questions, and we're going to start with kind of going to reverse it a little bit, only to do a little bit of makeup from the first panel, and because we ran out of members to ask questions. So I'm going to first ask for Representative Babin to be recognized for 5 minutes.
You're very kind. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Want to just say thank you very much to you folks for allowing me to come in here and to speak. I've got a definite vested interest in this and from my district. But I want to say thank you to begin with Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves for letting me join your hearing today. I have a question that I would like to ask of Mr. Moses from Virgin Galactic. So Mike, if you're hearing, commercial human spaceflight operates under a regime known as informed consent. Spaceflight participants are made aware of the risky nature of spaceflight and undertake the activity full knowing those risks. This is similar to skydiving or base jumping, scuba diving, paragliding, rock climbing, big wave surfing, backcountry skiing, and many other high-risk activities. And to further understand these risks, Congress prohibited the FAA from issuing commercial human spaceflight regulations so that the community could gather data from flights to inform future decisions. The industry has not advanced as fast as it was assumed when this learning period was implemented, which has led to additional extensions to gather this necessary data. In the meantime, the industry has made progress on developing non-binding, consensus-based standards and best practices. As you discussed a little bit, but also can you further discuss how Virgin Galactic integrates these standards and best practices into your operations without the need for more regulations? If you could answer that, please.
Sure thing, Representative Bowden, I'd be happy to. So I think it's important to maybe start by recognizing the framework that was originally built by the Commercial Space Launch Act back in 2004 by Congress itself is actually functioning exactly as designed, right? They innovated and came up with the policies of informed consent, of the learning period, and of the other things. And the record has shown that launches have been safe, innovation has been fast and rapid, and things are progressing well. So I think it's important to just recommend or recognize how well things are working. So that doesn't mean we stagnate there. We need to keep moving forward. I think the informed consent regime is an excellent tool that allows us in this nascent stage of development to be able to handle the risks that spaceflight poses to customers and to others while protecting the uninvolved public. And as a mechanism, it appears appropriate for now. You know, eventually you would look to a stage where commercial spaceflight transportation evolves to the scale of aviation, commercial aviation, where an informed consent regime is probably no longer necessary. But at this stage, I believe that is fairly relevant. Absolutely. Virgin Galactic definitely takes the lead and by joining industry with developing these standards that we're using, the voluntary consensus standards. And I think one of our challenges there is recognizing the diversity of types of vehicles being used. You have balloon launches, vertical launches, flyback boosters, horizontal launches, and space planes. And while regulating the outcome of a system is definitely a performance-based regulation, definitely required, regulating the means of how you got that outcome can really stifle that development and kind of limit an operator from challenging themselves to find new ways to achieve that same safety level. So I think these standards being run by industry are very valuable for now, and we need to continue to progress. I think we're definitely seeing, just like we see an increase in launch cadence, an increase in the maturity of those standards and readiness to head towards regulation with some of them.
All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Mike. I have the distinct honor of serving as the ranking member of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Before that, I was the chairman of the subcommittee for 4 years, and I also represent Johnson Space Center, the home of NASA's historic mission control. Because of this, I'm keenly aware of the fact that the Department of Transportation plays a very important role in enabling American leadership in innovative industries like the commercial space launch industry. The Science Committee has a long history of conducting thorough oversight of AST and the overall commercial space industry to ensure the safety of the uninvolved public and the sustained American leadership in this industry, just as this committee has a long and rich history of aviation oversight. Going forward, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will play an important role in further enabling the integration of commercial space activities into the national airspace system. Coordination by this committee with other committees of jurisdiction will certainly ensure that our nation remains the leader in commercial space launch operations going forward. I trust that we all share these goals and look forward to coordinating efforts going forward. And with that, I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to add this entire statement. I didn't have time to read the entire statement. I want to introduce this into for the record, if you don't mind.
Without objection.
Okay. With that, I yield back, and I just want to thank you again for your kindness.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes myself for 5 minutes for questions. First question's for Captain DePete. Captain DePete, how long have you been a pilot?
I've been a pilot for 40 years. Mr. Chairman. Started out in the Marine Corps and then in the commercial airline.
And in commercial airlines, what's the highest you've ever flown a commercial airplane?
Probably around 37,000 feet to 42,000 feet, somewhere in that range.
And how much higher than that does the FAA control the airspace?
Well, the positive control airspace goes all the way to 400, I believe.
Okay. So about 40,000 feet.
Yeah.
For NAS, yeah. So you, in your testimony, you mentioned yourself as a pilot. You mentioned air traffic control and air traffic controllers. All these folks who are involved in the airspace currently, as well, not just involved, but ensuring that it's operated safely. Is that about right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you also highlighted systemic space integration strategy. And my opening comments for this particular panel were about the airspace between the ground and getting to space. The FAA does need to have a positive control of that. And integrating these launches through that airspace that's already being used is pretty critical, and it seems the FAA has a role in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So getting to Representative Babin's statement about coordination between committees, I think is absolutely right on, very critical, but also shows the need for the committee here as well to ensure that the FAA's and FAA's safety mission has a place in these discussions as we move forward. Would you agree with that? Am I off base?
I would, sir, and I believe I've got experience on the NAC and the DAC. I don't belong to the CompStack, but I found it rather ironic that our goal is to end segregation and enter into a time period in the future where we have full integration. Yet the individual committees actually do their work relatively segregated. So it's my,
can I just comment? I wrote a note from Representative Babin's statement. That stovepiping of jurisdictions goes well past our time here in Congress, Representative Babin, and probably we do need to sort that out. So thank you, Captain. I'm going to go to Mr. Bruno. Your testimony references the update to the licensing process that the FAA began in 2018, and you applaud the FAA for streamlining the rules. How have these changes in rules directly impacted ULA launches in terms of timing and frequency?
Yes, I would like to acknowledge the collaboration approach that the FAA has taken with industry. They have, as been mentioned before, shifted from a prescriptive set of requirements to attain a license to performance-based. And this has allowed us to achieve the safety objective that they identify by different means that are more efficient and more responsive to our customers' desires. So again, the safety standard is achieved, but we've been given the freedom to innovate to achieve it.
Your testimony also makes mention of thousands of suppliers and partners that you partner with in the U.S. And I've made support for the aerospace workforce a priority for the subcommittee. What can the subcommittee and DoD and FAA be doing to encourage growth in this specific portion of the supply chain?
That's a great question, sir. It takes many, many people to design and build a rocket. We would like to see as much of that content done domestically in the United States. It protects us not only in terms of our workforce and our talent, but also in terms of our intellectual property in an environment where China has shown significant aggression in acquiring intellectual property, not only through what you might think of as traditional means through hacking or old-fashioned espionage, but more often now with economic means by infiltrating the supply chain, either by purchasing companies outright or by investing in companies in order to achieve influence and access to their intellectual property and ours. So I would ask Congress to consider means to allow us to be more robust in keeping China out of that supply chain.
Finally, I've run out of time, but I'm going to just take a prerogative here. At the beginning of the hearing several hours ago, in my opening statement, I mentioned the importance of diversity in aviation, the diversity in aerospace, and the diversity that we ought to be seeing in commercial space as well. In the future, this committee will be doing a hearing on diversity in the aerospace workforce, and whether or not any of you all are requested to be on the panel, I do want you all to take a hard look at whether you're a company or represent an industry, or in the case of Space Florida, a public corporation, you see yourselves. I want you all to take a hard look at the actions you're taking to increase the diversity within the aerospace workforce, especially as it applies to your portion in commercial space, and offer that written testimony to the committee. So again, if you're not on the panel itself, and I hope you do take advantage of that opportunity. It's critical. The demographics of the United States are changing. We need to change with it. We need to ensure an access to opportunity in these growing industries throughout the country, and we need to do our part. So with that, I want to now recognize Representative Graves of Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask a question of Mr. Bruno. Chairman Larson and I recently introduced the Aerospace Debris Safety Act, which tasks the FAA with various missions, including tracking re-entering space debris and working to mitigate the risk to aircraft operating in potentially hazardous airspace. Have you seen the legislation, and can you offer any feedback to us on that if you have?
I have, sir, and I want to commend your leadership on this. This is an excellent first step. What we want to appreciate is that we have talked about orbital debris and reentry for many years, but it was always tomorrow's problem. With the implementation of our first mega constellation in LEO, I can tell you that that problem has arrived today. The quantity and frequency of orbital debris reentry in the coming months and years will increase by at least a factor of 10. And so this legislation that asks the FAA to significantly increase the precision and availability of tracking data will allow us a very, very important tool in now space and air integrated traffic management.
Thank you. Mr. Moses, you note in your testimony that you agree that regulatory standards governing human spaceflight must evolve as the industry matures so that regulations neither stifle technology, innovation, development, nor expose the crews to avoidable risk. What do you believe is the best way to meet that objective?
Well, I think, one of the things we've recognized in our work with ComStack and industry is that trying to apply a one-size-fits-all set of standards or implementation will prove to be very challenging for implementation. An example there is just within our own system, right? We use horizontal stabilizers and vertical stabilizers like an aircraft would, which don't exist on capsules or vertical launched rockets. And so standards that apply to one don't necessarily apply to another. So step back for a second and find those common areas where you do have that commonality. Propellant handling, ground systems, environmental control systems, those are common across most vehicles. So let's start with those standards, get agreement on those, get industry sharing, industry reporting, start with regulation there. And so I think a one bite of the elephant at a time type of approach is the right way to get standards into the mainstream.
Thank you. Mr. DiBello, in your testimony, you all talk about commercial spaceflight as effectively being a form of transportation, and there's a line in your testimony where you say Space Florida urges an increased FAA effort in technology development and deployment to advance the safe and efficient integration of routine space transportation with commercial aviation. Could you comment on that a little bit and how you see that relationship, I guess, evolving as I mentioned in my opening statement, you've just seen an extraordinary increase in the number of commercial space flights?
Certainly, we have seen both an increase in the number of space flights, but more broadly, as we look at the horizon for the future, we're seeing an increase in the types of platforms that will be flying. And commercial industry is introducing and advancing technologies very rapidly and adapting them very rapidly. So what we're seeing with respect to integration in national airspace is that we need to take advantage of the capabilities that can be put into the vehicles themselves to know where they are, and the increases in safety, the diagnostics, knowing what's happening to the platform on the fly, so that many of those things can be fixed on the fly as software fixes, and take advantage of those to inform what we're doing as they transit the airspace. The second is awareness and communications. We have the capability today to significantly improve communications and awareness of what's happening in spaceflight, so that we can effectively narrow the launch window, the time in which the launch space has to be closed. And there's no reason why, as an example, a vehicle gets to 60,000 feet, oftentimes in anywhere from 90 seconds to 2 minutes. But returning, it passes through the airspace in 60 seconds. So there is no reason in the world why we can't more effectively integrate, use the data system, the space data system that General Monteith is putting into place, and work with much narrower windows to increase the volume of both launches and the ease on the air traffic control system.
Great, thank you. You're back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Representative Brown of Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your holding this hearing on this very important topic today. It's been a long day, and I thank our participants, our panelists, for sticking in there with us. Like you, Mr. Chairman, I too believe that Congress, and more specifically the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, plays a critical role in the future of the emerging commercial space industry, as well as in ensuring our national security. I also see the FAA playing a critical role in both of those as well. Mr. Bruno, you mentioned, so my question is for you, in your written testimony that, and I quote from your written testimony, foreign governments and multilateral organizations also have important roles to play. The United States does not have a monopoly, you wrote, on satellite constellations, and accordingly, the existing international rules of conduct for space activities must be revisited and new ones considered for this burgeoning area. And it's in the profound interest of the U.S. government to lead the way in confronting these issues with the invaluable work of the FAA. Can you expand on the importance of the FAA's role in international cooperation in protecting access to low Earth orbit?
Yes, sir, absolutely. It's important to understand that space is a global commons. What any actor does in space affects all of us. The satellites orbit the entire Earth. They do not stay only over our airspace. We are seeing the first large impacts of the new proliferated LEO or mega constellations that prove or promise such great benefits to us, but also present these new challenges. For the first time, we have a constellation on orbit which is physically dense and will impact our launch access to orbits that are just above or just adjacent to it. China has also announced plans to place a similar constellation in orbit, which is several times larger. So not only will we need to be concerned about our own industry and our own operators behaving in a responsible fashion, we must have agreements, international agreements, and standards of behavior that we all abide by, especially our peer competitors, potential competitors like China, as well as other countries. I would also want to add, building on something Mr. DeFazio introduced, that yes, we have seen a very large increase in launch rate recently. I would want the committee to understand that that increase is almost entirely due to lifting the current mega constellation, which is now being populated in orbit. And then each of those extra, if you will, launches carry dozens and dozens of spacecraft. So while we have a concern with air traffic during ascent, we have a much more physically crowded region within what we traditionally already call the congested space in LEO, which will lead to a very high rate of deorbiting spacecraft in just a handful of years as they begin to reach the end of their life.
So, Mr. Bruno, as you consider how to best protect the orbital environment through tools such as space situational awareness, two questions. What are some of the factors you consider? And what is the significance to national security in not having a robust federal government presence?
I'll answer the second part first. We pass through this lowest layer, this relatively dense now shell of LEO spacecraft to carry our national security payloads to do their vital work for the United States. If we can't lift them to space, they can't do their work. It's literally that simple. And in terms of how we manage that problem, we will need to manage the physical density of these constellations. We're going to require more precise tracking that is near real time of where the objects are. That will require cooperation from the operators because these spacecraft often have the ability to autonomously move in their orbit to avoid colliding with one another, which is a good thing, but we can't leave the Air Force and Space Force to simply monitor and hope to notice the movements and then later reposition where they think they are. And then finally, we really truly need these operators to plan on controlled deorbits. It's not just the issue of how many things are deorbiting through the airspace. It is also important that they be controlled so that they do not re-enter in a way that could harm the public, but also so that they re-enter in a predictable way. A controlled deorbit is steep, rapid, predictable, and precise, and known in advance. An uncontrolled deorbit is a wide sweeping arc that has great uncertainty all the way down to impact. So we need those things in cooperation between the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. We're going to go with Representative Van Drew. Is Representative Van Drew up? Yep, there you are. Representative Van Drew, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for appearing before the Subcommittee of Aviation to discuss the exciting area of commercial space. The United States has been leading space exploration since the very beginning. Whether we were landing on the moon or building a global satellite telecommunications network, our country has accomplished incredible goals in space. We find ourselves in a new era of American leadership in space. American development of reusable rockets offers the potential for far more efficient space exploration and even civilian passenger transportation. As this new industry grows, we need to ensure that it is properly meshed with the existing national airspace. Safety needs to be the absolute top priority in everything that we do. In that line, I have several questions for Captain DePete of the Airline Pilots Association. First of all, if you had just one recommendation on a single action that the FAA should take in order to support space operations into the future, what would that one action be?
Sure, thank you for the question. Without a doubt, that's an easy one for me. It would be to pull together the individual committees of the NAC, the DAC, and the ComStack that deal with the airspace users and meld them into a single advisory integrated system. Currently, right now, much of the work is being done segregated. It's very little topic matter being discussed in those committees regarding commercial space, except in the ComStack. And I think that would go a long way because together with that, I think it would lead towards more of a development of a safety culture, which I think is the beginning to really reaching full integration.
Well, thank you. And that sounds like a good recommendation, by the way. Does the FAA give pilots information about space debris that may be entering the atmosphere above them as they're actually flying through the air?
No, sir, and thank you for bringing that up. Look, our number one priority of my members is safety. That's what our union was founded on. They have the regulatory responsibility and the professional duty to ensure the safe conduct of a flight. And it's absolutely essential. They have a need to know about the areas of risk that they enter. Currently standing right now, other than NOTAMs, which is another whole subject, I know Representative Staver has a lot to say about those as well, and so does we, but there isn't really any kind of real-time information, and it's hard for a pilot in command to make informed decisions without being aware that he may be entering an airspace that is elevated in risk. So it would be very helpful. We really need to tackle that problem.
Any sense why they don't do it?
Well, I'll let the FAA
Answer for themselves.
Well, I just believe that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that could be used right now to help do it. Well, I know that the SDI was mentioned, the Space Data Integrator recently, previously on the first panel. And one of the frustrations that I have is that currently the data that comes from the SDI, after many years, I mean, this is a known problem, has to be manually entered into the air traffic controller's screen to be able to do that, to pass the information along to us. That needs to be automated. That's an easy one. I think that's pretty easy fix, and I think we could fix that, and that would go a long way.
Good. One more. I've heard you talk about safety management systems for the airlines several times. Do commercial space operators use safety management systems as well?
No, sir, but they absolutely should. And again, I don't think you can get there from here unless you do that. And if you're targeting full integration, the thing about a safety management system is I think we should talk about safety culture first, because that's the part that's the foundation. And that's the way safety is perceived, valued, and prioritized within an organization from the top on down. And it empowers people to report issues, to communicate freely about safety issues. It affects the attitudes and the beliefs and the behaviors. And that is the foundation for a safety management system, which is a more formalized adoption through tools and procedures for a structured safety program. So without that, that's how the airlines got into the situations where they are right now and why our system is so safe.
Good, which is what we want. Safety is number one. Captain, I appreciate your testimony. And Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Van Drew. Chair now recognizes Representative Johnson of Georgia for 5 minutes. Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your time and your testimony. The cosmos, as Carl Sagan once said, is all that is or ever was or ever will be, end quote. Today, our curiosity about the cosmos has led us to pursue human spaceflight, adding to the lexicon words like spaceport and orbital debris. As we embark on this new frontier, we must prioritize safety, equitable access, and diligently pursue limited environmental impact. Mr. DiBello, as the single point of contact for state aerospace related activities, Space Florida is in many ways a gatekeeper to space industry businesses. Your testimony states that part of your mission is to support infrastructure development and enable growth of commercial space companies. Has Space Florida made a concerted effort to engage historically disadvantaged businesses? And if so, what has come of that engagement?
Most certainly we have. And I can tell you that we engage regularly, just as we lead with infrastructure for the commercial companies. We also are concerned with the whole ecosystem that supports the development of spaceport and spaceport operations. A key element of that is the workforce. So we put a lot of effort into working with the state university system, the community colleges, the technical trade schools, and ensure that programs exist, whether they be curricula focused on needed space skills, and first of all, that they exist, and secondly, that they are really open to the variety of constituencies that really want to work in the space field.
Well, I thank you for that. I'd like to ask What steps will Space Florida take to ensure that minority-owned and women-owned businesses are not disadvantaged in accessing the enormous opportunity and resources that the new commercial space industry presents?
Well, I can tell you that the industry recognizes that women and minorities oftentimes make up better than 50% of the classes that we look at in the universities, community colleges.
Well, I'm talking
technical
about
schools.
businesses. I'm
Well, I
talking about
understand.
money now.
Yes, but the businesses recognize that many of those students are in the upper third of their class. So we engage actively in building training facilities and infrastructure that can in fact be industry guided to attract those students into their workforce and give them a directly hand on acquiring the kind of talent that they need.
All right, thank
assure
you,
that
sir.
it's
I
in
wanna
their
move on
interest to
to-
do that, please.
I want to move on to my next question. I thank you. Mr. Moses, at NASA, you played an integral role on spaceship missions during ascent, orbit, and entry operations. As such, you must have had an unparalleled insight into the experience of astronauts, many of whom are changed by their travel to space. One such change is a newfound appreciation that humans are earthlings above all else. Can you please speak to how the ability of everyday humans to travel to space could allow us to reimagine ourselves beyond racial, economic, and nationalistic divisions and see one another as first and foremost human?
Representative Johnson, that's an amazing question. You've written one of the tenets of our company's foundation values, right? We really believe the opportunity to go see space, see Earth from space, witness the no borders, no boundaries, the thin boundary of the atmosphere, the fragility of the Earth's ecosystem, and that we are all humans on one planet headed in one direction is a really transformative experience. And the more people that can experience that, they'll bring back to their daily lives. They'll integrate that into their culture, their business dealings, their education. And soon we will become a spacefaring nation, a spacefaring global economy, and a people that will look past those differences and see the commonality.
Okay, I thank you for that answer. Mr. Bruno, your testimony makes reference to the geopolitical dynamics at play in the human spaceflight industry. How can the United States bolster its presence in spaceflight while mitigating intercountry competition and fostering collaboration?
Sorry, sir, I lost your audio at about the word mitigate.
Sorry, Mr.
Okay,
this is the chair, Mr. Johnson. Your time's expired, but if you could get that question to the committee, we can get it to Mr. Bruno for the record.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Representative Steele of California for 5 minutes. Representative Steele, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves. And thank you for all the witnesses staying late today and joining us, and really appreciate it. Southern California and California as a whole has a long history in aerospace and continues to be a leader in this field. Today, as we look to the near future, my state and private sector entrepreneurs, businesses, and manufacturers in aerospace are making great progress on the innovative technologies that will continue to radically transform commercial space travel. The FAA plays an important role in encouraging, facilitating, and promoting the commercial space transportation industry while ensuring safety through permitting and licensing. I believe we must continue to work to take advantage of the innovations being achieved by private sector entrepreneurs to lead us into the future of the space flight by ensuring efficiency in permitting while also protecting the safety of our communities, and that the innovation in this field will help advance the entire aviation industry. My first question was, Biden administration requested $5 million increase in the budget for the operational count of Office of Commercial Space Transportation, but General Monteith already answered that. So I'm gonna go straight to the second question to all the panelists, that how might commercial space research and development be used to add ongoing aviation R&D and enable future high-speed aviation and transportation solutions? That means connecting between both learning in commercial space R&D and regular traditional aviation, and how they can work together, where they can find a common ground to improve across all types. So we can make like a flight faster, and how are we gonna do this, that we work together?
I'll start, Representative Steele, by saying that the FAA has already started on a track of very good and productive collaboration with industry on solutions that are performance-based, and that will be a significant enabler of that activity. There's one other point I would like to make relative to General Monteith's earlier testimony on talented workforce, where he talked about the need to have a close relationship with industry and with universities so that there is adequate talent within the FAA to do their mission. I would hope that the committee would understand that this problem is more difficult than simply STEM, than simply having engineers who move into the aerospace profession, and some of them going into the FAA. The safety discipline within rocketry is highly specialized, highly narrow, and there is a limited number of personnel across the industry and within the FAA who have those skills that are not taught in the universities, but rather taught in industry and at the FAA. And anything that Congress can do to support the FAA's opportunity to develop and attract that talent will benefit all of us.
Thank you.
And Representative Steele, I will be happy to maybe address how the technology innovation between spaceflight and aviation potentially marries in the future, and highlight what my fellow panelists and other members of the subcommittee have highlighted, that the integration of the airspace into a single common user, single common source is highly critical for that. You can imagine a system. One of the reasons our company pursues horizontal launch from aircraft is we see a much simpler integration into the airspace for future transportation of high speed systems. And so getting those steps made now for how airspace is deconflicted, times are kept short, interactions are made very efficient, is critical for those future innovations and technology developments for aviation.
I'd like to, if I may, go ahead, add to that if I can. In response to the question, clearly the industry has been advancing technologies across the board. Space is hard, and as we advance technologies which enable us to do things in space, many of those do flow across a horizontal industry and infuse themselves into what we know about aviation. But the big advantage is the fact that space assets have become increasingly more vital to management of not only our airspace, but to things in space, to things in the air, to things on the ground and in our back pockets. This integration that is occurring and connectivity that is occurring and the amount of data that are being gathered by the thousands of satellites that are now up there and will be put up there will enable the FAA to have access to the data and the awareness and communications mechanisms that it needs to fully integrate space and air together.
Okay, the representative's time's expired.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for joining us today, and thank you for your patience. I won't apologize for Congress exercising its basic constitutional duty of voting today. I know it was inconvenient for you to wait around, but I guess the payoff is the value of your testimony is very important for us as we continue to look at ensuring the safe integration of commercial space into a very busy FAA-controlled airspace. So with that, again, I want to thank the panel. and each of the witnesses. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.